Hey there, I'm Dave Butler.
And I'm Grace Freeman.
Welcome to Don't Miss This.
Our weekly scripture study class.
Y'all, this is our kind of last week. Listen, I've lied to you so many times in the
If you're
last
confused
episode or two,
within the next 2 weeks.
It was because of me. Last week, I told you that we have Christmas and then this lesson. And I just looked at the schedule this morning right before Grace is about to go out of town. And we had to hurry and record this because I was like, oh, whoops. So next week is Christmas. Today's Moroni 10. The Christmas lesson ended up being really good. We went through, here are some of the great scriptures throughout the Book of Mormon that talk about the Christmas story. So don't miss the Christmas one.
So get excited. Get excited.
Next week. And you can actually do it on Christmas week now instead. Because it'll be out and ready. And then this is Moroni 10, the wrap up of the Book of Mormon. So next week in the Christmas lesson, if we start talking about Moroni 10 coming, just know that we recorded that before because Grace confused me on the schedule. So this is the last one, Moroni 10, which is just the wrap up. And it really does feel like a wrap up. Like in my mind's eye, I picture Moroni there, about to bury the plates and just kind of putting in his last, his own witness on there. I don't know if he knows yet that he's going to be the angel that will deliver the plates to Joseph Smith and become his personal mentor. But he's just putting his last heart and soul into this book. And I love in verse 1 of chapter 10 who he says I'm addressing it to primarily, where he says, I write unto my brethren, the Lamanites. And I think that's really an important part of the book. It's in the beginning, it's to all nations, all people, but in particular, this group of people who've chased him, who've hunted him down, who've been seeking for his life. They kill everyone who won't deny the Christ, he said at the beginning of this last book. And he writes to them and he gives these exhortations to them, almost as if he's saying, if he is extending this grace to them in a way where he's saying, if you knew what I knew, I bet you wouldn't be doing that. You know, it reminds me, just saying that, and I don't know if this is going to end up fitting, but it just made me think of this line that I talked to this lady once who was doing a mission or volunteer in the prison, and she was doing someone's family history work with them, and like they were on the computer together, and they found out together that he was a direct descendant of Hiram Smith. And he knew something about Hiram Smith and his tender heart and his loyalty and just his ability to set aside, the power grab and just how he was there from day one. And because he says to her, he was like, oh, wow. And then he said, you know what? I bet if I'd known that, I wouldn't have made the choices I did that ended me up in prison. And I just think that was terrible grammar that I just did, but hopefully you got the feeling and the point of that. And I just think what you're about to read, these exhortations from Moroni, these things that he thinks are the most important to his soul, it's almost as like he's saying, I lived my life in the way I did because of what I know. And if you just knew these things, and then don't you love that it's also a one more call out to a God of second chances, to this murderous, wild, rebellious, rambunctious group of people. He says, I have a message for you. You don't give a message to people that sounds like Moroni 10 if they're out of the game.
Yeah.
And so there is still in that verse 1, just this, the who he is delivering this to in particular, I think is a really important part of it.
And I think it says so much of who Jesus is to him if he could start this last chapter with that invitation. That he must know something about Jesus that's making him think this isn't over for these people. This isn't the end of the story because I've seen Jesus meet people where these people are and help them change and help them grow.
Right.
And obviously the Jesus he knows is not one that gives up on people.
Right. The way we live, the things we say, I think reflect what we know and what we believe, and you're seeing that.
For sure.
In verse 1. We're calling this lesson, by the way, Remember These Things. It's a line from Moroni in this last chapter. I think it's verse 27. I'm not going to, but I'm pretty sure. I'm going to be like 9.5. Are you checking?
It is.
Okay, good. And I think that's such an awesome way to end the whole year of the study of the Book of Mormon, where he just says, remember these things. There's things that you learned and experienced throughout this year in this study. And Moroni is extending that invitation to us to say, remember these, hold on to these things. I met this girl last night at my class, after my class, and she just said, hey, I just wanted to say, I've never read the Book of Mormon before until this year, studying it together with y'all on the podcast. And I didn't think I loved that book. And now I just finished it, and it is a treasure to me. And I want us to hold on to that, the treasures that we've learned. And Moroni is going to help us do that in this chapter. Okay, the first is this famous promise, right, that Moroni gives in here. And if you've ever been a missionary before, this is something that you hand to people all the time, because the book comes with a built-in promise that says, if you can actually pray and ask God for yourself if these things are good and if these things are true. And it's one of the last things that he wants to say to anybody who reads this record. I have this promise for you. And I heard somebody say one time to me, you can't do that with the Ford manual. You can't pray about it and know that Ford is the true and living car company, or you can't do that with...
You're doing a sponsorship, but the opposite.
Listen, you guys, if Ford Bronco does want to sponsor me, I wouldn't be sad. But Moroni ends this book with and includes that promise in here. And that promise has so much validity because of how many times people have followed through on it and have shared it. Like, the collection of the witnesses of the Book of Mormon is, at this point in the history of the world, astounding. Like, it started with a couple of people. Like, remember that bookstore, Moon's Bookstore in Provo? And they have a copy of Samuel Smith's Book of Mormon. And in the back are the testimony of the witnesses. That's where they were in the original Book of Mormon. And he wrote a little like X or something, or signed his name next to his name in his Book of Mormon as one of the witnesses, you know? And in the beginning, there were really just a handful of people who were able to say, you know, but at this point, exponentially, there are so many witnesses to the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon. And Moroni tells us how someone can have that confidence in the reality of this book and its message for themselves.
Well, and something that I love about these next couple of verses is it almost feels as if it's an invitation to make this book your own. That now, instead of just reading it, it's just like, oh yeah, that's just another book. This, especially to me, verse 3 and 4, is this moment when he's like, wait a minute, this has become so much more than just a book to me. This has become so much more than just like, I'm a little bit bored, like I better open something up and like have a little story time. And all of a sudden, rather than him just like explaining that, I think it's him reaching out and saying, listen, this can be so much more than just a book to you. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think is so cool, especially he starts that way in verse number 3, because I think not only is he saying that this book can impact you, but I think he's also pausing and saying, the person that you are introduced to in this book, the Lord that you meet in the pages of this book, does not just stay on the pages. He is not stuck from 1 Nephi to Moroni. That's not where he dwells. He is 100% in those pages, but also he will show up in your life the exact same way. And that is what I think is so unique and special, not only about this promise, but about this book, is that it is not just speaking about the main character of this story. And when you read it, you get transported into it. Like when you read Harry Potter and then all of a sudden Harry Potter becomes so real. And then you finish the book and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, now I'm in regular life. But I think it's him pausing and saying, you will meet the Lord in this book. Mm-hmm. And then you can live every single day the rest of your life. If you believe what is in this book, that means that he's not stuck there. Yeah. Which I think is so, so cool.
Right. And even just the fact that he's extended an invitation onto a book that he's going to put into the ground is evidence that he believes that. 100%. This story's over. That, you know, this chapter of it has closed and we're burying it in the ground. But he has every intention and belief that the God you found in the pages of the Book of Mormon is going to show up in from his time onward as well. And this kind of gets skipped a lot in verse 3, this invitation. A lot of times, if you're familiar with this idea of Moroni's promise, you may have heard someone say, you read the book, you pray about it, and then God will manifest the truthfulness of it unto you. But it starts in verse 3 in a really important invitation where he says, I want you to remember, first of all, if it be wisdom in God, that you should read them. So this is already tuning your heart to gratitude. You're recognizing it was wisdom in God that I even stumbled upon this. It was by his graces and his goodness and his foresight that I even have access to this book. So you're already beginning in this place of a God who sees me and a recognition of that he arranged for me to come across the pages of this book. So it kind of starts that, right? And then he says, I would that you would remember how merciful the Lord has been unto the children of men, from the creation of Adam, even down until the day that you receive these things. And ponder that in your heart. Stop and let that sink down into your soul. And this year, if you're new, you're just finding this out, but that's okay. You can read the Book of Mormon again. We've kept track of the mercies of the Lord throughout the Book of Mormon. Some of them, one from every single lesson. And this is so awesome. At this point, I want to take this with my family and just say, let's remember the stories of the Book of Mormon. And in particular, let's remember not what Nephi did, not what Abinadi did, not what Ammon did, not what Avish did, not what King Lamoni's wife did, not what the mothers of the stripling warriors did, not what the stripling warriors did themselves, but let's remember what the Lord did in all of their stories. That is what we are trying to focus on this year. And these would just be some of the many mercies. He's like, from the time of Adam until the day that you receive this book. And I think by putting you into it, like you were saying, Grace, he's giving you the invitation there. Is like, and remember the mercies of the Lord, most in particular in your life. Because why remember his mercies from the past? Remember the introduction. What's the introduction to the book say? Where it's like the title page. The great things the Lord has done for our fathers is the line that's in there in the title page. In that second paragraph where he just says, the point of this book is to show the remnant, me and you, of the house of Israel, the great things the Lord has done for their fathers. Why recognize the great things he's done for them? Oh, so that you can anticipate and expect him to do those same great things in your own life.
And I think just really this is, I guess, really practical thinking, but I truly don't know if there's a better way to end the Book of Mormon, the lessons that you've had with your Sunday school classes or your seminary classes, or even with your family or your roommates or whoever you study with, and just pausing for a second and going through, like David said, and thinking about really specifically what God did in this book. And that's really hard to switch that mindset, I think. And sitting down with your class or your group of friends or whoever you're sitting with and saying, okay, what great things do you remember? And they'll probably list off stories. And I think even pausing right there and saying, okay, what did God do in that story? What was his role? Yeah. What mercies did he show up with in that story? And then I love that it invites you to think about your own life, that he's like, wait, this didn't just start at the creation of Adam and end on Moroni 10. This isn't the end of the mercies of God. Like, that is still true. He's still showing up in your lives. And I think right now, especially nearing the end of the year and ending the Book of Mormon and all of these moments, and just pausing, and maybe you're a journaler and you want to go through your journal and look at the great things that God did for your life, but maybe you're not, or you have a class that isn't, and even sending them somewhere as simple as like their Instagram account or even their like camera roll of their phone and saying, okay, I want you to start in January 1st. And I want you to go through just to like spark their memories and just say, where did you see God show up in your story?
Awesome.
Yeah. And just like have this moment that it's like, wait, you learned how to recognize that in the Book of Mormon when you just read it. And now recognize that in your own life, in the own pictures and memories and moments and words from your own life. I think it'd be a really cool lesson.
And I'm just kind of thinking, if you have this poster, if you have these things printed out, You can find them on the app, yes. If you want to just print it out last minute or whatever here.
Yeah, because that would be a really cool idea also, that if you're with a class and you didn't do this and you're like, wait, I missed out, find it on the app, because it really could be cool to cut these all out and just pass them out to random kids in the class and just say, like, okay, like read that has the verse on there, and just say, what did the mercies of God look like throughout this whole entire book?
Or another thing is, if you have this or you print out the paper and look at it, you could say, okay, when has God provided an escape for me?
Beautiful.
Because I see what he did here. They were led by the Liahona back in this chapter. Okay, when have I been led?
So cool.
Oh, they were strengthened in Alma 2. When was I strengthened? And you can kind of go through and just see that, oh, wow, that the God who did the great things really is still doing some of those great things for us today.
Yes.
And we have two things to show you on this. Oh, I did want to say this just real fast. That last line, don't skip that last part of 3 that says, and ponder it in your hearts. Just let it just marinate in there and soften up your heart to become a heart of gratitude. I cannot think of a better, wider gateway to the presence of God than a grateful heart. And that happens again and again and again throughout this book. And we see it in modern psychology and studies as well, that a grateful heart is the doorway to the presence of God. He says it here because verse 4 is going to be a revelatory verse. And he just says, gratitude precedes revelation. And I want to make sure that that's an important part of this. The poster that you can hang up for this week is that promise that is there, that this line right here, that he will manifest the truth of it unto you by the power of the Holy Ghost. And that would be a great discussion too, if you're with a group of people, to say, how has God manifested truth to you? To hear and recognize and see the way he speaks to different people in different ages and different times and in their own language. We're going to really learn that as we jump into the Doctrine and Covenants next year. But I love having this at the end because it's also a reminder of that God is a God of promise. And he's a promise keeper as well. So we have that you get to hang up in your house. But then the worksheet that's in here, or that you can print out from the newsletter, is a chance to just write your own witness of the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon here. I also would use this page to say, fill out what we were talking about. What did you learn about the character of Christ from this book? How did you come closer to him by reading about who he is in this book? And that would be, I think, what you want to write on this witness page. You can do it in so many different ways, but I think the intention in the very beginning of the book, right? Mormon's intentions were, what are the great things he's done? And what do you know about who he is? And that he is the Christ, your personal savior.
I think we talk about this promise all the time, and I think we mostly talk about it and what it means for us, which I think is really powerful, and I think that's true. And it's an invitation, you can act on it, and we think about how that is applicable in our everyday lives, which is true and real. But the other day I was scrolling and I saw like a TikTok, and it was like not like a great TikTok. It was just like one of those TikToks that was like, I can't believe that the Mormons really believe what they do, and like that's so crazy. And it was just like a little bit like, there's no way that people actually believe in the Book of Mormon. That's like what the whole purpose of the TikTok was. And it was so interesting because right when I like saw it and I like heard it, the first thing I thought was just like, oh, like I wish they could just try it. Mm-hmm. Like I wish that they just had the chance to try it. And it wasn't a malicious intent on my part, and it wasn't me trying to force someone's hand, and it wasn't me being like, you have no idea what we believe, da 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 da. Like it genuinely was this pause where I was like, oh, I wish you could just have like experimented. I wish you could have just read the book. I wish you could just try living this way. And right when I read that, I just thought of this promise at the end of the Book of Mormon. And this time I didn't think about what it meant for me, but I thought about what it teaches me about who God is. And I love that we believe in a God that does not force our hand, but rather says, I promise I'll show up. I promise I'll speak to you. Are you willing to try it? And I think it invites us into a relationship, not just of love with him, but of trust.
Yeah.
And he says, listen, I'm not going to force you to be who I want you to be. I'm not going to force you to be this person that I hope for. I'm not going to force your hand at anything you do in life, but I will invite you. And I will hope, and I will promise that I will show up for you. And that's what I love about this. And that's how I want to treat people when I share the Book of Mormon with them, and when I invite them into the way I believe, and when I share what I believe and the truths that I hold so dear. I want to treat it the same way God does, and just pause and say, like, yeah, this is where I'm at, and this is what I believe, and maybe you should try it. And I'm not going to yell, and I'm not going to scream, and I'm not going to force, because that's not what my God teaches. That's not how he plays this game.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's really important. And like, I always love going down to verse 7, that very first line, and ye may know that he is. Like that's the reason somebody wants to pray about the message of the Book of Mormon. They're not praying about the book, but they're praying about what the book teaches. And the book teaches the character of God and how he's going to show up in our lives. That is the truth we're after, is believing that he is, right? And I want to know that he is, and that he's someone I can trust, and that he's someone who loves. And that's does that make sense? Am I making sense?
100%.
I don't want to know the book.
Because it even says that in the introduction, I think, or maybe it's the title page, or I don't even remember, but I think that's so interesting when it says, like, no, we're going to invite you to do this, because everything, like Jesus being the savior of the world, that knowledge can be discovered if this book is true.
Yeah.
And that's why you want to know if this book is true.
Right.
Because you will be introduced to a savior who suffered and died and saved you.
Yeah. So then he moves from there and says, now let me give you like these exhortations. And I looked up like what that word meant. I thought it was like a really cool definition. And I wonder if I screenshotted it. Yeah. To strongly encourage or urge someone to do something with a sense of earnestness. It implies offering advice, counsel, or persuasion in a way that inspires action or change. And I just like that he's going to almost give us these exhortations that are lessons from the whole book.
100%.
As we look back. So,
which is so exciting. And let's just say this right now, because it's fun. That is the coolest way to end something ever, because I feel like anytime you have a really powerful experience, I think it always leads you to ask this: now what? Yeah. Now what is going to happen in my life? Right. Now that I lived through this, now that I experienced this thing, now what is going to happen? And I love that he says, here you go.
Yeah.
Now what? This.
Yeah. Right. So he says this. Number one, I just put, and I could have missed one, but the first one we just did was like, ask God. I exhort you to just ask God. Just think of the implications of all of these. That means he's available. That means that he'll answer. That means that you one-on-one can talk with the king of the universe.
And let's pause there, because what is even cooler to me is that he has just given you a book of evidence that that's true.
Yeah.
And how cool that he's like, ask God. And if you wondered if he was going to answer you, think about Enos. He answered him. And think about Alma the Younger. When he was having that big change of heart, he showed up for him. And think about like go through, and he's like, wait, here's your evidence that he really will show up.
Yeah, because even you think of like the kinds of people that are in this book. And it starts with a dad, and then a son, and then someone from a dysfunctional family. Everyone in the book's from a dysfunctional family. Moms, missionaries, servant girls, soldiers. It just covers this. It's a book that breaks you out of the box that says God speaks to prophets. And he does. I believe that. You find that in this book. But it breaks that wide open and says, look at the categories of people that asked God, and he came into their lives. Verse 7, where he just says, I exhort you to deny not the power of God. And I just reversed it to the positive of it, which is to deny it is to push it away. And he says, I want you to receive his power. Like open your heart to it, receive that power and embrace his gifts. In verse 8, and then he goes through and he says, can I just tell you what some of them are? Let me just go through and I'm going to list. Here's what some of those gifts are. He is a God who gives gifts. Embrace them. Receive them. Open yourself up to them. I love verse 17 at the end of the gifts when he says, and they come unto every man severally.
That is the best part.
Right?
Yes. I love that word.
And then this, according as he will. And then I wrote in my scriptures, and his will is good. Okay. So like live like that. Remember, verse 19, he says, remember he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And I put a fill in the blank here because I love this idea. Remember his constant what? His constant love, his constant forgiveness, his constant presence, his constant answerings. Just he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. It's kind of what we were just talking about. He says, remember that, right? If you read this book, you're going to remember that, look, this book is 1,000 years long, right? So we have evidence already that this dude who lived in whatever year, I forgot all the years, 600 BC, right? We're like in 400 AD right now. Do you see how he didn't change in this book? So remember that for you. Live in faith and hope and charity throughout your life. Like, as problems come, as questions come, as family drama comes, approach them with faith, hope, and charity. Approach your tragedies with faith, hope, and charity. Approach each day with faith, hope, and charity, right? Is what he says. And then these last verses that are so welcoming and warm. They take me back to 3 Nephi 11. Is where they take me back to. Where he says, come unto Christ, is what he says, and lay hold upon every good gift. Because in 3 Nephi 11, they came and they laid hold of his feet and his hands and his side. They came close to him. That wound in his side was a token of intimacy, where he says, come close to me and lay hold of everything that I have to offer. And there's something about that that's just, I'm going to try and be general with this because I didn't ask for his permission, but someone I'm really close to just told me recently that he goes to was talking about a couple of years ago being at the Thanksgiving Point Gardens, and there's that statue of Jesus that you can actually walk up to. And he walked up to it and he said that he looked around and just made sure nobody was kind of looking. And he just grabbed on to his hand. And I just thought about, that's how I want to live my life. I want to live my life laying hold, not just on him, but he laid hold on the spot that was the evidence of his love. And that's what Moroni says. He's like, at the end of this book, if you've learned anything, you should learn he's approachable, and you can lay hold on him, and you can fall into his embrace in times of worry and weakness and mistake. And he just says, every good gift that he has is available for you in there. And then this one, 31, just kind of what you were saying, just awake and arise, right? So live different than, if that's true, if all this is true, then wake up and do good and great in this world.
I felt like you were going to do the song.
What was I? What song?
Wake up and do something.
Oh. Grace, although I didn't know what song you were singing for a second, but God
no
bless
one does.
you.
I'm
You
not really good. I'm not really a singer.
You have other gifts.
That was the most embarrassing thing I've ever done.
Yep. That's on the internet.
Move on.
This is on the internet.
Move on. Let's pretend it didn't happen. Start talking again.
This is on the internet, right? And then this line in 32, come unto Christ and be perfected in him. Can I just add one, just like a little teaching with 32? This will come up again in Doctrine and Covenants 20 when we get there, and we'll bring this up again. But when he talks about be perfected in him and denying yourselves and loving him with all, and he says, then is his grace sufficient for you. This is not talking about his saving grace on the cross. He did that for us. And we learned in 2 Nephi, just asks us to believe and receive it. 32 is talking about an exalting grace, a grace that makes us different. And he just says, so learn of his love. Now put your life into those wounded hands and let him change you. Be perfected in him. Give him your discipleship. Give him your energy. Give him your gifts, and see how he multiplies and changes him. And that's that invitation at the end, like you were saying, like, now, okay, great. I learned who he is and I want to do life with him. And now the invitation is do it. Arise, awake and arise means get up out of whatever is the things of this world aren't even close to the thrill of a life with God.
Well, and I think that's the thing. When you were just going through them, I was just still playing that same game in my head. And I was thinking of so many stories that we've studied this year of people who lived like this and who did try to embrace his gifts, and different people that we can connect to. Oh, I saw that gift in all of these people that we've read about and studied about. And I've seen people live in faith, hope, and charity. And I've seen people come unto Christ and awake and arise and shake off their chains and become new people. And as I was just going through that list, it was so encouraging to me that that is the end of the Book of Mormon, because he's not looking back at them, but rather he really is inviting you to live the story, not just read the book. And I love the book of John in the New Testament, how it ends. And there's just this verse that is like, I'm going to just do a little summary of it. It's not going to be exactly right. And it just says like, the whole world couldn't contain the amount of books that would have to be to tell Jesus' story, to tell the stories that Jesus accomplished. That was a very paraphrased version, but you can find it, John 21. And every time I read that, I always think, oh, I want to be able to tell a story like that. Mm-hmm. I want my story to be his. And I want it to be a book that people read and they don't just know me, but they know him better because of my story. And I love that while it doesn't say that exact same verse at the end of Moroni 10, I think the invitation is still the same, that we can live stories that point people to him. Mm-hmm. We can live stories that when people read it, they are not getting to know us, but rather they are getting to know him better. And that is what I love, that this is how this book ends. That it is not just, okay, you read this story and you know these people now and you feel like you really got to know the pages in here really well, but rather it's saying, you keep this story going. Because all throughout these pages, it was all about him. It was his story more than any of theirs. And that is an open invite to keep his story going.
Yeah. And this book showed me how to live differently. It showed me how to live in relationship with him, that it was possible and what it could look like. And both of those have been motivating to me. And when I think about, if someone were to say, how do you know the Book of Mormon is true? I like going back to that verse 6, right after he says, you can know that it's true. And he says this, and whatsoever thing is good is just and true. And, I just got back from that trip, that tour I led through Central America. And we taught about, it was kind of a travels of the Book of Mormon, because maybe it happened here and nobody knows. And sometimes we want to talk about some of the evidence we see, like that's contemporary to the Book of Mormon, in archaeology and languages and whatever, to say that the book is true. And great. That's a fun hobby. But I remember just being on that trip and thinking to myself, I was like, I don't need any of that, because the way I know it's true is because of the goodness that flows into my life as I learn and live out the lessons that are in here. My life is good because of what I know about God. My life is good because of my relationship that this book helped me come closer to him through. Like, as I that's how I know. Like, I have evidence of it in my own life. I'm a better man. I'm a better father. I'm a better husband. I'm a better neighbor. I'm a better citizen in my community because I'm a better disciple. Because of the lessons and the inspiration and the permissions and the promises that I found in the pages of the Book of Mormon. And I've lived them out, and he's been good to his word and has manifested that goodness or that truth into my life and my story. I feel like a living witness of the reality of the Book of Mormon, which in turn means I'm a living witness of the reality of the goodness of God. So, okay, y'all, Merry Christmas. Next week's going to be your Christmas one. Then after Christmas, if we don't see you on Christmas week, it really was a good one. Just go watch it during that crazy week.
And it's little, and it's short. You can just do a little.
You just love it. And then Doctrine and Covenants. It comes right after. So go and get all of your things ready. Get your scriptures ready for the Doctrine and Covenants. You can go buy the cheap paperback ones, or you can get the wide margins, because remember, we're going to really do the margins. Go get your tip-ins so that you can have that lesson every single week with your family. Go get your posters just as reminders of them. Get your 365 so you know what to read every day, and you can send your kids out of the house with a little invitation. Go get all your things and get ready to go. You don't need any of it. You do need the Doctrine and Covenants. But if all those can be helpful, we're really excited for to let the to be continued. The story just keeps going on.
Oh, we can't wait.
Next book. So we'll see you then. Merry Christmas.